The senator from New Jersey.
I ask that the quorum call be waived.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, what brings me to the floor is the Kyle amendment that is presently before us. And I've listened to some of my colleagues say how this is the wrong amendment at the wrong time. And I would simply say that, in fact, this is I happen to agree. I happen to agree that it's at the wrong time. I might very well agree with Senator Kyle on the underpinnings of the amendment. I think we need to do what we must in order to ensure that Iran does not achieve the possibility of a nuclear weapon. And whatever we need to do in pursuing a two-track parallel as we engage them at the same time, have them understand that if engagement isn't going to achieve them stopping their goals of a nuclear weapon, that there are sanctions and consequences. But this is the wrong way to do foreign policy in an omnibus bill, just as it is the wrong way to do foreign policy on the Cuba provisions in this bill. And so, you know, I feel compelled to come to the floor because I'll oppose the Kyle amendment, particularly because I think it is wrong to include it in an omnibus bill without going through the process, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and others, to consider, in fact, whether this is the best policy, to have an open and free debate about it, to be able to vote it in a way after such rigorous debate. But we are being asked to vote for an omnibus bill that has provisions that changes significant foreign policy as it relates to the United States and Cuba. And so there is a duality. There is a duality. Finally, I have been reading a lot from our friends in the blogosphere and others who talk about this issue on Cuba and the press. What is incredible to me is that they still can't cite one human rights activist in Cuba, one democracy activist in Cuba, don't have the name of one prisoner of conscience inside of Cuba. They lose track. They talk about policy, but if it was any other part of the world, Mr. President, we were talking about Burma, if we were talking about what happens in the Sudan, if we were talking about any other part of the world, we'd see the same attention being given to the human rights activists, democracy activists, the political prisoners inside of Cuba that languish each and every day, and their crime is simply to try to create a civil society in which the benefits of the freedoms that we enjoy here in the United States, to be able to come to a body like this and be able to debate, to be able to choose our elected representatives, to worship at the altar that we choose to worship at, to be able to enjoy the benefits of the sweat of our labor, whether by brawn or by brain. But there's silence. I'm a little tired. I'm a little tired of the fact that we keep reading about those who will spend hours listening to Castro's soliloquies, but not spend 1 minute with human rights activists, with political dissidents, with independent journalists. You know, there was a time when we used to help human rights activists and democracy activists in the world, when we put an international spotlight on people like Lech Walesa in Poland, when we did it with Václav Havel in the Czech Republic, when we did it with Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the former Soviet Union. By creating that spotlight on those individuals, we gave them the opportunity not to be harassed on a daily basis as Cuba's democracy advocates are, and jailed and imprisoned and sentenced sometimes for a quarter of a century for some minor act that, in fact, we would enjoy here as one of our fundamental freedoms. For wearing a simple white bracelet that says cambio, change. Change in the last election in the United States could get you elected president. Say change in Cuba sends you to jail. And yet, there's silence. There's silence. It is deafening. It is deafening. So I will vote against the Kyle Amendment because I think it's the wrong process in an omnibus bill. But by the same token, you can't have it one way and say it's wrong to have major foreign policy changes in an omnibus bill and then be silent about the other. It's wrong to say that our policies should be changed but not have one word about democracy, human rights, political prisoners. It's amazing to me that the people don't know who Oscar Elias Bassett is, an Afro-Cuban doctor who ultimately was sent to jail for 25 years simply because he refused to perform the abortions that the regime called upon him to do. And he protested it, and he was sent 25 years to jail. Or Marta Beatriz Roque, who in fact languishes with health issues, and every time she goes out, most recently went out to visit a U.S. diplomat, got beaten along the way. Or Antunes, who is in a hunger strike, trying to create limited openings in civil society and protesting the beating and incarceration of another human rights activist. So I hope people will get to know their names, like they did Václav Havel and Lech Walesa and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and others in the world, whose voices, I hear those people come here, our colleagues come here and talk about those voices, and I am proud of them for doing it. But they need to start speaking out about the voices of those who languish in Castro's jails and stop losing the romanticism of the regime and start talking about those human rights activists, democracy activists, those who are suffering simply to create an opening in civil society within their country. Then there'll be some balance. Then there'd be some equity. And then we'd have an opportunity to maybe move on broader in the context of policy. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.